For 3 years, my life was ruled by the bell, but not the one you're thinking of. I was a custodian at a massive high school, and since I was the new guy, I got stuck with the overnight shift. Every single night, I was completely alone in that sprawling 4-story building. During the day, it was a hive of activity, buzzing with the energy of 1,000 teenagers. But at night, it transformed. It felt like a giant tomb made of brick and steel. My footsteps echoed in the long, empty hallways. And sometimes, I swear, it felt like something echoed back. That Friday night started just like any other. I clocked in around 10, grabbed my trusty mop and bucket, and started my slow, methodical journey on the first floor. It was a familiar routine. By the time midnight rolled around, I had worked my way up to the third floor. The third floor. I always hated it up there. It had a different kind of quiet. A heavy, oppressive quiet. Half the classrooms were permanently locked, relegated to storage. They were filled with the ghosts of education past, broken desks, stacks of outdated textbooks, and creepy old science lab equipment. The air up there always had this distinct smell of stale dust and cold metal. I was pushing my mop down the main hallway. The long fluorescent lights overhead started to flicker erratically. You know how they do that? Buzzing and blinking, making the shadows dance and jump with every flash. It was unnerving, but I was used to it. Then, I saw it. About 20 feet ahead of me, a classroom door was slightly ajar. Now that just wasn't right. Shouldn't have been possible. I was meticulous about my work. I had personally checked and locked every single door on that floor when I first came up. It was part of my security check. My first thought was to just keep walking, mind my own business, finish my work, and get out. But a weird sense of curiosity, or maybe dread, made me stop. I leaned my mop against the cold tile wall and walked slowly, almost cautiously, toward the room. My rubber-soled shoes made a soft squeaking sound that seemed way too loud in the silence. The door was one of those old, heavy wooden ones with a small, grimy, square window in it. I pushed it open just enough to peek inside, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The room was dark, but the flickering hallway light cast long, eerie shadows. It looked empty, just as I expected. Rows of old desks were stacked against the walls, and cardboard boxes were piled high in the corners. Everything seemed perfectly still, except for one box. Near the back wall, one box was tilted at a strange angle, completely out of line with the others. And on the floor right below it, I could see faint scuff marks on the polished tiles, as if someone had dragged it. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I knew for a fact I hadn't touched that box, and I was the only person supposed to be in the entire building. Shaking my head, I told myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I pulled the door shut, making sure I heard the solid click of the latch, and walked away. But my hands were trembling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A few minutes later, after finishing the end of the hall, I had to pass by that same classroom again to get to the stairwell. As I approached, my blood ran absolutely cold. The door was wide open. Not just ajar, wide open. I froze in my tracks, every hair on my arms and the back of my neck standing straight up. I knew I had closed it. I was certain of it. I took a hesitant step closer, my shoes squeaking again, announcing my presence. I peered into the darkness of the room. It looked the same, except for the box. That same tilted box was now sitting right in the middle of the floor. My voice was barely a whisper when I called out, "Hello? Is anyone in here?" The only answer was the buzzing of the faulty light above me. Absolute silence. And then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It was a slow, deep breathing. It was coming from the back of the room, hidden in the deepest shadows. It wasn't the wind whistling through a crack. It wasn't the old building's pipes groaning. It was breathing. Someone was in there. I could clearly hear the steady inhale and the slow, deliberate exhale. It was the kind of breathing someone does when they're trying to be quiet, but also want you to know they're there. A wave of pure ice washed over me. I didn't think, I just reacted. I slammed the heavy wooden door shut with all my strength, the sound echoing like a gunshot down the empty corridor. Then I ran, bolted down the hallway, rounded the corner, and burst through the door to the stairwell. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs I thought it was going to break free. I could barely breathe. I pressed my back hard against the cold metal door, just listening, straining to hear anything over my own frantic heartbeat. There was nothing, just the ringing silence. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to pull my phone out of my pocket with shaky hands and call my supervisor. He was understandably annoyed to be woken up after midnight. I tried to explain what happened, trying my best not to sound like I was losing my mind. He just laughed it off, said I was tired, overworked, probably just hearing things in the old building. But he agreed to come down, telling me he'd be there in 20 minutes. Those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every single creak in the building made me jump. Every shadow that flickered in my peripheral vision looked like a figure standing perfectly still, just watching me. When my supervisor finally arrived, his tired, skeptical face was almost a welcome sight. I led him back up to the 3rd floor, and as we got to the top of the stairs, we both saw it. The door to that classroom was open again. The box was still right there in the middle of the room. My supervisor's lazy demeanor vanished. He walked straight into the room, pulling out a heavy-duty flashlight and sweeping the beam across every dark corner. We checked everywhere. Behind the stacks of desks, under the old teacher's table, inside the dusty supply closets. There was nothing. No one. He finally just shook his head and told me I was clearly stressed and needed to take it easy. I didn't argue. What could I say? But I couldn't forget that sound. That slow, steady breathing. For the rest of my shift, I was on edge. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting a locker to slam open or a door to creak behind me. Every shadow looked like a person. A few weeks went by and things went back to normal. Then one night, another, more experienced custodian was chatting with me before our shifts crossed over. I casually mentioned the creepy 3rd floor, and his face changed. He told me a story I'll never forget. Years ago, a student had apparently been caught hiding overnight in that exact classroom. He was just playing a prank on his friends. But the elderly teacher who found him in the dark had a massive heart attack from the shock. He didn't make it. After that incident, the school shut the room down permanently. The story sent a shiver down my spine. It made a horrifying kind of sense. But it still didn't explain what I heard. Months later, I was back on my own, back on the overnight shift. I avoided the 3rd floor for as long as I possibly could, doing all the other floors twice. But eventually, I had to go up there. The moment I stepped off the elevator, I felt it again. That heavy, suffocating stillness in the air. As I walked down that familiar hallway, I forced myself not to look at the classroom. But as I passed it, I swear I heard it again. A faint but unmistakable sound. Slow, steady breathing, coming from behind the closed door. I didn't open it this time. I didn't even slow down. I just turned around, walked straight back to the stairs, and left that floor for the rest of the night. To this day, years later, when I close my eyes and let my mind wander back to that old high school, I can still hear it as clearly as I did then. It's that deep, quiet breathing coming from inside a classroom that was supposed to be empty. Thanks so much for listening to my story. If you have any of your own creepy experiences, I'd love to read them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Stay safe out there. For 2 years, my job was the night custodian at an old high school. And out of every single room in that sprawling building, one place absolutely terrified me: the auditorium. This thing was massive. 3 tiers of seats staring down at a wide, empty stage, with curtains hanging from the ceiling like heavy, dark shadows. During the day, with students and teachers around, it looked perfectly normal. But at night, it felt like stepping into another world entirely. Even with all the house lights on, the darkness never really left. There were always corners the light just couldn't reach, and sounds that, well, they didn't seem to belong to me. Most nights, I saved the auditorium for last. I'd put it off as long as possible. Something about it just made my skin crawl. But one freezing winter night, I couldn't avoid it. A school play was scheduled for the next morning, and the place had to be spotless. It was just after midnight when I pushed open the heavy side door. The hinges screeched like a warning cry. When the door slammed shut behind me, the echo rolled through the entire empty room like a clap of thunder. I took a deep breath and started sweeping the aisles, my broom scraping across the floor, but the sound was strange. It echoed back at me, but it felt like it was coming from somewhere. Behind me, after a few minutes, I heard something else. A faint rustling noise coming from the stage. I froze, my eyes darting to the heavy red curtains, but nothing moved. It's just a prop falling over, I told myself. Or maybe a draft. I tried to ignore it and kept sweeping. Then I heard it again. This time it was clearer. It was the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the wooden stage. I stopped moving completely. The only sound in the entire cavernous room was the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. I shakily raised my flashlight and climbed the steps onto the stage. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling and getting swallowed by the space. Silence. No answer. I shined the light behind the curtains. Dust motes swirled in the beam like a thick, ghostly fog. All the props and scenery were stacked against the back wall, completely motionless and lifeless. But I could feel it, could feel a presence. Someone was there, watching me. I backed away slowly, my own footsteps echoing loudly across the wooden floorboards. Every single creak of the stage felt like it was answering me. I kept telling myself it was nothing. It was just the old building settling, or maybe a rat scurrying around. But I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that I was not alone. I went back to sweeping the aisles, trying to work faster now. But with every scrape of the bristles on the floor, I felt the air change, growing colder and heavier, as if the room itself was taking a slow, deep breath. And then, from above me, came a whisper. It was faint, barely there, but it was unmistakably a voice. It seemed to be coming from the balcony seats. It was soft and low, like someone whispering to another person just out of sight. I froze again, my head snapping up towards the darkness of the upper tier. "Hello?" I called out, my voice bouncing around the empty seats. But no one answered. I forced myself to keep working, my hands slick with sweat, but the whispering didn't stop. In fact, it got closer. It felt like it was moving slowly across the upper level, following my every move. My flashlight was shaking in my hand. A primal instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were bolted to the floor. Then, as I turned back toward the stage, I caught a glimpse of something. Up in the balcony, in the deep shadows, a shape, just a dark outline sitting upright in one of the seats. I blinked, and it was gone. I stared for a long, heart-pounding moment, trying to convince myself my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, that it was just a shadow. But then the whisper came again. This time it was closer, much closer. It said my name, clear as day, softly right behind me. I spun around so fast I dropped my flashlight. It clattered onto the stage, the beam rolling in frantic circles. But there was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. The air was cold and dead still. Too still. I could feel something watching me from above, the way a hunter watches its prey just before it strikes. The whispering had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was so much worse. Then the footsteps started again. This time from the balcony. Slow, heavy, pacing back and forth, like someone was deliberately walking just to let me know they were there. That was it. I was done. I ran. I sprinted down the aisle, fumbled with the door handle, and yanked it open. The cold night air hit my face like a slap of ice. But even as I scrambled out, I could still hear it from inside the auditorium. Those same slow footsteps, still walking, still following. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Outside, I leaned against the cold brick wall, gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't go back in. Not that night. Didn't finish my shift. I never set foot in that auditorium again. The next morning, I told one of the older veteran custodians what had happened. He just laughed, said I'd probably just heard the old building settling, but then he told me something else. Years ago, a beloved drama teacher had died during a late-night rehearsal, right there on that stage. A sudden heart attack, they said. He told me that some students and staff still swore they could hear him walking the stage at night, checking the lights, whispering lines from old plays to himself. I tried to brush it off, to accept the rational explanation, but deep down I knew. The voice that had whispered my name, the footsteps that had paced above me in the dark. It wasn't just the building. Even weeks later, whenever I had to walk past the auditorium's locked doors, I could feel it again, that cold, heavy pressure in the air. And sometimes even now, when I close my eyes in a quiet room, I can still hear the echo of my name being whispered from the darkness. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have any experiences like this, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the dark. Stay safe out there. For almost 5 years, I worked the night shift as a custodian at a middle school. Most nights, it was just me in the empty halls. I'd clock in at 10, put in my headphones, and get to work mopping floors, wiping desks, and usually watching the sunrise from the front doors as the first school buses rolled in. At first, I really liked it. No kids running around, no teachers leaving, passive-aggressive notes, just quiet. But as the months turned into years, I realized the school wasn't just quiet at night, it was dead. The building had this way of creaking and groaning, almost like it was breathing around me. You'd hear pipes knocking in the walls, and every now and then, a locker door would just pop open on its own. You tell yourself it's nothing, just the building settling, but after a few hundred nights alone, every little sound starts to feel personal, like it's meant for you. There was one part of the school I hated more than any other, the basement. It was part of the original building from the 1950s and ran under about half the school. It was all concrete floors, exposed pipes, and the smell of damp, stale air that just never went away. The lights down there were a joke. They flickered constantly, so I always had to carry a heavy-duty flashlight just to see where I was going. When I first started, one of the older custodians, a guy named Frank, told me to avoid it unless it was an absolute emergency. He just laughed and said, "That place is haunted." I laughed along with him, but deep down a part of me believed him. I always felt a weird chill just walking past the basement door, even when it was locked shut. So for the most part, I stayed away. That worked for about 2 years. Then one night I came in and saw a note on my task list from my supervisor. Bring up folding chairs from basement storage for tomorrow's assembly. My stomach just dropped. I stood at the top of that stairwell for a full minute, staring at the heavy metal door, debating whether to call my supervisor and tell him it could wait until morning. But I didn't want to seem lazy or like I was making excuses. So, with a deep breath, I turned the handle and pulled the door open. The stairwell was like an echo chamber. Every single footstep bounced off the concrete walls, making it sound like someone was walking right behind me. At the bottom, only 2 of the long fluorescent ceiling lights were working. The rest of the hallway was just swallowed in blackness. The smell hit me immediately wet, concrete and decades of old dust. The chairs were supposed to be in the second storage room on the left. When I grabbed the handle of the rusted door, it shrieked open with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Inside, the air was completely still and cold. I shone my flashlight around, found the stacks of metal chairs, and bent down to pick up a few. And that's when I froze. From out in the hallway, I heard a sound, a soft, dragging noise, like someone slowly sliding their shoe across the concrete floor. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped. My heart was pounding. I peeked my head out of the storeroom and shined my flashlight down the hall. First one way, then the other. Nothing, just long dancing shadows. I told myself it was just my imagination, the building settling again. I picked up the chairs and started carrying them toward the stairs. I was about halfway down the hallway when I felt a sudden freezing draft right against my face. It was impossible. The basement had no windows, no active vents. There was no way for air to be moving down there. I set the chairs down and decided to just get the rest and get out as fast as possible. I went back into the storage room, and that's when I noticed something was off. The stack of chairs I hadn't touched looked different, like they had been shifted slightly. I tried to brush it off, convinced my mind was playing tricks on me. I picked up another load of chairs and turned to leave. That's when I heard it again. Asterisk. Thump. Asterisk. Followed by a slow scraping sound. It was coming from farther down the hallway, from the darkness beyond the reach of the working lights. I pointed my flashlight in that direction. About 20 feet away, a classroom door that I knew had been closed tight was now cracked open, just a few inches. I was certain I hadn't touched it. The entire school was locked up tight every night. No one was supposed to be in the building but me. I called out softly, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello? Is anyone down here?" There was no response. Just this heavy, pressing silence that felt like it was pushing against my eardrums. I could feel every single heartbeat in my throat. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the air pressure. Maybe a faulty latch on the door. But I couldn't stop staring at that dark crack. It looked like something was waiting just on the other side. Finally, I started walking toward it, my hand trembling so much the beam of my flashlight was shaking. When I got close enough, I took a deep breath and pushed the door open fast, swinging it wide. My light cut across dusty shelves, old cardboard boxes, and thick cobwebs. The room was empty. I took one tentative step inside just to be sure, and that's when I heard it again, that dragging, shuffling sound, but this time, it was right behind me, in the hallway. I spun around so fast I almost dropped my flashlight. There was nothing there. just the long, dark hallway. But I could feel it. That thick, invisible pressure in the air when you know, you just asterisk, no asterisk, you're being watched. My chest tightened until it felt hard to breathe. I started backing up slowly out of the room, keeping my light pointed straight down the hall. When I reached the stairs, I didn't even think. I grabbed the chairs I'd left and ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, not daring to look back until I burst out into the main hallway upstairs, gasping for air. I slammed the basement door shut, and even though I wasn't supposed to, I locked it. I didn't care about getting in trouble. About a week later, I was mopping the floor in the hallway right above that same stairwell. Suddenly, I heard 3 loud bangs from below. Asterisk bam, 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 asterisk. They were evenly spaced, like someone was pounding on the wall with their fist. Then, the basement door started to rattle violently in its frame, like someone was trying to shove it open from the other side. I dropped my mop. The plastic handle clattered on the tile, and I just stood there, frozen, staring at the shaking door. It stopped after a few seconds, and the hallway was silent again. I never went back down there. Not ever. If something needed to be brought up from the basement, I told my supervisor it would have to wait until another custodian was there with me. People just laughed when I tried to tell them what happened. They'd joke and say, "Oh, that's just the ghost of the basement." But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. And to this day, when I think about those slow, dragging footsteps in the dark behind me, I still feel sick to my stomach. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have any of your own creepy work stories, I'd love to read them in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more. Stay safe out there.